This is Dateline News and Conversation. The show tonight is with my good friend Sylvia Demarest, and we're going to talk about a few things: the AI bubble, data centers, China said no to Trump, and why no tomahawks to Ukraine. Sylvia, welcome back to the show.
Hey Regis, how you doing?
I'm great. You're looking good. You sound great. Let's get into this. Uh, Pick it up wherever you want to start.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that there's been a lot of back and forth about what's going to happen with Ukraine and what's going to happen with tomahawks, and will the United States continue to give these kinds of weapons to Ukraine, and what's going to happen with that war? And of course, nobody knows. The one thing everybody needs to remember about everything I'm going to say today is that we do not have perfect information. In fact, we have very little information about what's going on. But there have been some things that have occurred in the last few weeks, and actually that have been building for several decades, that I think are kind of bringing everything to a head. And it's a consequence, really, of the United States being overcome by neoliberalism about 45 or 50 years ago, and people deciding that corporations needed to run the world, that labor had to be controlled, and that profits needed to go into the pockets of investors rather than workers. And so, as a result, the United States deindustrialized, we offshored our production. I think we thought initially that especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that we would be able to take over Russia and control Russia and her assets. And then when China was given most favored nation status, I think everybody thought that we would be able to go into China and completely control China. Well, that's not what happened. Instead, we deindustrialized. We lost our educational base for educated, highly technical industrial workers, and China did not. China moved ahead and created an enormous industrial complex that has now taken over in terms of the leading edge manufacturing globally. And that includes the things that are vitally necessary for militarism and for the West to continue to be able to bully people around. And so that came to a head a couple of weeks ago when China decided that they would pull the plug and say, look, we see what you're doing. You're bullying everybody all around the world. And so we have said, no, we're going to impose controls on exports, especially of these vital materials that are necessary to make weapons. And as a result of that, I think you saw a change in attitude. And I think if there's one reason why Russia is not, I mean, Ukraine is not going to get tomahawks, it's because we don't know that we're going to be able to make very more of them. And I'd like to follow that up whenever you're ready to discuss why and how that happened.
Well, we'll do that in just a minute. I want to go back to the top about tomahawks to Ukraine. I'm wondering what your thoughts are that on Thursday, the day before Trump was supposed to meet with Zelensky in the White House, which turned out to be a disaster all the way around. But on Thursday, Putin talked to Trump for over 2 hours. I am wondering what that was all about. I tend to think that Putin had to tell Trump right to his face, it was probably a video call, that you do not send tomahawks. That's the last line you will cross. And he warned him, I am sure, that if he did it, as Trump would say, really very bad things are going to happen. What are your thoughts about that scenario in terms of Trump then saying, we're not sending them, well, at least for now?
Well, there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, I think it's been very clear that Russia has wanted to contain this war within Ukraine and has done everything possible, despite all of the provocations, to continue to maintain that posture and not to respond to these provocations. And as you know, there have been provocation after provocation with the hope that Russia would do something that would then allow a wider war. Russia has not done that. Russia has refused to do that. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind, given the fact that, as you know, and as we've discussed, there has been a lot of complaints about how slow the war is going, that Putin has not responded to these provocations, that Russia is being seen as weak, etc. And so there's no doubt in my mind that Russia made it very clear that since you can't tell whether this is a nuclear weapon or not, because these tomahawks can carry nukes, since you can't tell that that's going to have to be taken as a direct attack on Russia. And also, since there's no way that Ukraine can fire these missiles by themselves, they can't arm the missile, they can't target the missile, they can't fire the missile without the United States being directly involved. There's no doubt in my mind that Putin made that very clear and made it clear that some reaction would be necessary. But I think it goes further than that. I think also on October the 9th is when China decided that they were going to pull the plug on allowing the United States and the West to be able to produce these weapons. And so I'm sure that that discussion has been had as well. Now, I looked into these tomahawks. As I understand it, about 4,000 have been made totally, and a bunch of them have been used. So, how many could there possibly be left that would be available not only for the United States to use, but to be able to give to Ukraine? And the best estimate, and remember, these are highly classified things, and we're all guessing here because we don't have the information that we would all like to have. But the best guess is there's about 1,600 left. So the U.S. really isn't in a position to give any of these weapons to Ukraine to begin with, because we don't know how many more we will be able to produce, how quickly.
Yeah, well, I agree with all of that. And I think there definitely is a connection between what you segued into when China said no more of these rare earth minerals. They're medium and heavy minerals that the United States is completely dependent on for the manufacture of just about all of its military hardware, but also other technology that the United States needs these for. That goes to appliances, that goes to automobiles, goes to aircraft, whatever. And so when you combine the two, that the United States will not have the money to build more of these types of missiles and everything else it needs. And then you connect it with the meeting in the White House. I think, in a way and in a sense, Putin got Trump off the hook. What do you think?
Well, I think that's possible. Look, this is a very complicated situation, and I wish somebody globally had an answer to what actually is going on, but of course, no one does. You know, the United States, as I've written about many, many times, has difficulties. We have an enormous budget deficit. We're in the hole about $1 trillion every 100+ days. We owe about $38 trillion. Part of what people are saying Trump is trying to do is to figure out a way to put together all of these resources to act as collateral to be able to continue, because no one wants to have to tell the American people that we're going to have to tighten our belts. But ultimately, that is probably what is going to happen. So there's a lot of balls in the air, if you will. And people think the President of the United States has all the power in the world and can do anything that he or she wants, given all that power. But that's not what's true in practicality. There are a lot of interest groups in the United States, and many of these groups want war. And so the president has to try to manipulate and to manage all of these varying interests. And I'm frustrated with what Donald Trump is saying and with a lot of what he's doing as well. But we have to remember, he's not a solitary actor here. He has to manage all of these varying interests. And these interests, I'm afraid, are a hell of a lot crazier than he is. And they want war. So that is what is going on behind the scenes. The president is trying his best to manipulate this situation in order to achieve objectives which I'm not sure he has the power to achieve. But that will probably be the balance of our conversation later in this interview.
Well,
Why that?
I'm glad you brought that up because a couple of things that you mentioned that struck me. Number one, I think China, Russia, India, and most of the rest of the world realize that the United States is in very deep trouble that you just alluded to. It's a non-sustainable economy. The, in fact, the economy is predicted to collapse. Whether it will or not, or when, I don't know. But a lot of people are talking about that. Um, Russia, China, India, and the BRICS are moving even quicker now towards, well, if you don't like de-dollarization, they're moving towards and using their own currencies in their trading relationships with each other. So, from Trump's perspective, I agree with you. He's got a lot of issues on the table that I think he is somewhat aware of. I think some of the things that are going on, he's not. He's not getting good advice. I think, as you mentioned, uh, he's not the king, even though he likes to appear with the crown on his head. Uh, uh, he is not all powerful. So I think he's being squeezed, and I agree with you. Um, I want to know uh, what you think now about this upcoming summit, they're calling it, in Budapest. That was a result, for sure, of the telephone call that Trump and Putin had on that Thursday before the meeting with Zelensky. What do you think that's all about?
Well, I need to respond to a lot of what you said previously, but first, I don't know that the summit is going to come off in Budapest. First, I mean, all of these things are, to me, a play for time. Time to see if the war will resolve itself, time to see if something else comes up. As far as where the United States is right now economically, we're not the worst off. If anybody is going to collapse, I would imagine it will be Europe first. If you will recall, during the Great Depression, it was the default of several European banks that set off the Great Depression. Europe has put itself in a very, very bad position here. In order for Europe to be viable, it needs to have a relationship with Russia because Europe is resource poor. Europe has always been resource poor. In the past, the way that Europe dealt with this situation was through colonialism and through achieving resources through the colonial uh, system. That is slow, still remnants of that still exist, but that's going away. Europe needs cheap energy, and the only way to get cheap energy is not from the United States, which charges 3 or 4 times what Russia does, but from Russia, which means Europe needs a relationship with, which is anathema to the neocons. It's anathema to the Zionists. It's anathema to a lot of the people that have money that are driving these stupid policies that are sending the world to war. The United States has more inherent capacity than Europe does. The United States is still a very powerful country. Yes, we have enormous bubbles that are going to burst. Yes, we've created an absurd economic system that needs to be drastically reformed. Yes, neoliberalism has caused all sorts of dislocations that have harmed the public. 75% of Americans can't really participate in this economy because they're too indebted. They don't have good jobs. Nobody cares about them. We've created a system where money talks. Every person in Congress has been purchased by someone and some interest. So yes, there's going to be trouble here in the United States. Probably the sooner the better. Bubbles need to burst, reforms need to be enacted, reality needs to be accepted. Yes, we are probably going to have a reduction in our standard of living. It's almost inevitable. But the United States is not Europe. The United States is more powerful than that. And the United States can rise again with the proper policies. Unfortunately, we're going to have to get rid of everybody in power right now and enable an entirely new generation with new ideas to make that happen. And as you can tell, I'm pretty damn irritated about it.
Yeah, you're on fire. I love it. Uh, I want to follow up on two or three things you just said. Uh, you mentioned that Europe will probably collapse first. Uh, I'm not in Europe, but I get more news about Europe and what's going on because of the insanity uh, that's going on in Europe. Their march towards war. They're all beating the drums of war. At least most of the heads of country, with the exception of Viktor Orban in Hungary, uh, but they are preparing for war, and they are bankrupt. And Germany is leading the way. They're overwhelmed with all kinds of problems, and immigration is a huge one. Now, you mentioned also playing for time. That's what I meant when I said I think that Putin was giving Trump an out. He was letting him get off the hook. The summit in Budapest is definitely playing for time, where Trump doesn't have to follow through on escalating beyond any kind of point of return by sending tomahawks to Ukraine. So I don't think anything's going to come of it, really, except that it's going to be a big PR thing that is going to allow Trump time to recover. Now, I want to get to some of the other things you're talking about. You mentioned the AI bubble, you mentioned neoliberalism. Where do you want to go with that?
Well, yeah, the AI bubble kind of feeds into what I said previously, and that is that ever since neoliberalism came to the fore, they have been in the process of basically devouring the wealth of the United States and concentrating that wealth in the hands of people that really have no business being in power. And so we've had bubble after bubble after bubble. We could have do a whole show about just the whole bubble psychology in the United States. I mean, we are a nation of immigrants who came here and found this enormous place with all of these resources. The people who lived here, unfortunately, were susceptible to the diseases that we brought in, so we took over the place and ate up that wealth. And we were very hungry for power and for wealth. And that kind of attitude persists in the United States today to our detriment. But um, the latest bubble is this AI bubble, and it really has two facets. I think one facet is that there is a race for what I'm going to call the machine of control, and that is an artificial intelligence system that will literally run the world. And that's what everybody, I think, is racing drastically towards. I don't know that they're going to get there. If you'll notice, it's so important that they've forgotten all about the environment. They've forgotten about climate change. They've forgotten about gouging the consumer by raising electricity prices, by using up all the water. They've forgotten about all of that in this quest for this artificial intelligence that will create a machine that will rule the world. Well, I don't know that they're going to get there. It's probably a bubble, but I think artificial intelligence is what they see as being the what they need to implement this panopticon of complete and total control, where everything that is done is known, and these algorithms in real time can predict everything everybody globally is going to do before they even know they want to do it, and then interfere with any attempt to change anything or to modify the system so that it's fairer and more reasonable for most people. And so that seems to me to be what's going on with this AI bubble right now. It will probably burst, and that means that reality will then come to the fore. And the reality is that if the United States wants to maintain itself as a global power, it will have to realize that without a manufacturing base, which is probably too late to create at this point, that isn't going to be possible. And so that will mean that all of these neocons and these neoliberals and these warmongers will have to sit down and look in the mirror and realize that whatever their dream was, that unless they're willing to go to the point of nuclear war, where they destroy everything, they're going to have to back down.
Wow. Well, you just dropped a nuclear bomb on everything else that people are being consumed with. Uh, what do I mean by that? What's really going on over and above everything else that we're witnessing that you and I have talked about tonight and in previous shows, artificial intelligence, data centers that collect all of our actions, our communications, all of our locations. All of this now has been collected. Edward Snowden warned about this years ago. And this is, for me, terrifying because I think where it's headed, unless this AI uh, technology bubble burst, we're headed towards a type of neo feudalism where we are serfs and machines, have total control. Sylvia, you know this as well as I do. Digital currencies are a reality, including here in Russia. It's not universal, it's being tested, but it exists. Also, digital IDs, also facial recognition, all existing here in Russia, I'm sure in many other parts of the world, and completely in China. We'll talk about that in a second. And biometric imaging. In other words, just by recognizing your face, and there are cameras everywhere, just by a digital identification on your passport or your driver's license or whatever you hold, and based on you touching anything or anything that they can determine by seeing your eyes, they will have everything about all of us. Sylvia, I am just as terrified of this global universal control as I am of a nuclear war. And you know, Sylvia, I'll mention just this, and then you take it from there. China, for years now, has had this uh, system in place where they have uh, data centers. Everybody is being observed and really controlled. They have a social credit system, which, when they do good things that the government approves of, they get pluses. When they do bad things, jaywalking, driving over the speed limit, buying something you shouldn't have, or saying something you should have, you get negative credits. This is terrifying for me, but a good friend of mine who lived in China for many years said they love it. And he thinks it's great because as long as you're a good guy, you have nothing to fear. Sylvia, that's really scary.
Well, I think that this machine, this panopticon that they are wanting to implement, is already being done by a number of different companies. Plantar in the United States has been doing it for some time, and their algorithm plugs into all of these data flows, and it has predictive capacities. They're now selling it not only to the intelligence agencies and to the militaries, but to police departments, etc. There's no question that I think they see this level of control as perhaps a substitute for militarism. In the past, whenever you wanted to control people, you invaded them. Perhaps now, I've got this funny light on my chin. Perhaps now, instead of doing that, you just simply come in and co-opt them because you know what they're going to do ahead of time. Because you have every piece of information that's available on every individual, including how many people they've slept with, what their bank account looks like, what their habits are, who their friends are, what they do on Tuesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They will know everything and they will be able to predict that. So it could be a substitute for militarism, and they need to find a substitute for militarism because um, without the industrial capacity to create these weapons and but even to do a digital economy, they're going to need China. So I think it's time for us to talk about that while I try to figure out why I have a white shadow on my chin.
Don't worry about it. The video is good. It looks fine to me from here. Um, yeah, it's a very scary world. You've mentioned the United States has lost its manufacturing base, and I can remember that vividly when Clinton uh, did that. What the heck was it called? That
Most favored
North
nation.
American Free Trade Agreement
Oh, yeah.
with Canada and Mexico, that we were going to be able to benefit from all of our stuff being manufactured cheaply somewhere else. Everything from cars to refrigerators to you name it, that we were going to offshore. That was the beginning of the deindustrialization. That's a translation to the lack and the loss of millions and millions of highly skilled workers in the United States of America that were not re-educated, were not retooled, but um, that was a devastating blow, and it increased uh, rapidly in these years since. The thing about it, what was the U.S. response to China? As China was developing these manufacturing techniques, state of the art, we kept claiming they were stealing from us when we have sent all these industries, hard machine like industries and high tech like uh, telephones, all kinds of technology. China just zoomed ahead. Now, we talked about Russia, China, and the United States, that axis. Uh, Given what is going on in the world today, uh, China and Russia knowing what's happening in the United States, recognizing everything you've talked about today, that we've discussed today, China and Russia still have to tread very carefully. Do you agree?
I agree. Now, what you have to remember, Regis, is the reason why the United States deindustrialized. There were several reasons. Number one, they wanted to destroy the power of the unions. They did not want to have to answer to working people. That's number one. Number two, they didn't think that enough of the profits was going into the pockets of the owners. They thought too much was going for wages. And so, in order to destroy the power of unions and to reduce wages, they started looking for some place to send the manufacturing so that they could basically think that they were going to run the world. And so they succeeded. They've deindustrialized the United States. And now what are we faced with? We're faced with the fact that we don't make anything and are dependent on other countries to provide us with the things that we need. Now, China, on the other hand, uh, is a little bit more foresighted than that. China took a look at the situation and they heard all the talk coming out of DC. We're going to confront China. We're going to weaken China. We're going to control China. So China said, look, looks like we're going to have a war. And if we're going to have a war, well, then we probably ought to prepare for it. And so let's see what the situation looks like. So China did a complete review of their industrial system to see where they were strong, where they felt like their supply lines were secure, where they felt like they were not. And in order to be able to prepare for the coming war that they knew was on the horizon, they took a look at everything. And the one area that they found was that they were dependent on the United States for helium. And so they went through an enormous review process and several years to make sure that they became independent of helium. And then they took a look at what the rest of the world was doing in terms of the things that were needed for not only the digital economy, which includes AI, but for the military economy as well, which includes all of these sophisticated weapons. And that's when they came up with their statement of October the 9th, where they put controls not only on 21 different items, but on batteries and other sophisticated devices, not only on the items themselves, but on the technology that was necessary to produce them, on the equipment that was necessary to produce them, and on the information that would be necessary to figure out how to go about setting that process up. And so that was the first um, shot across the bow, if you will. It's taken a while for this to sink in, but I think it has fully sunk in. And the reaction of the United States and Europe to that is very telling. Everybody just basically freaked out. And one of the first things they did was to not only try to threaten China, well, that didn't work out. The stock market kind of reacted negatively. And so then they went a little bit quieter about it. So next, they confiscated a company in Europe called Nexperia, which is a chip manufacturer. And then they realized that most of those things aren't made in Europe to begin with; they're made in China. So that didn't work out. And so now the question is, how is the United States going to respond to this? How's the West going to respond to this? And what will it take to even produce one of these items? And I'm prepared to talk about just one of them. It's something called gallium.
Well, go for it.
All right, gallium. What is gallium? Gallium is not a rare earth. It's a soft silvery metal that will melt in your hand on a warm day. It's the byproduct of aluminum production. It's not a rare earth. China has basically cornered 98% of the worldwide production of aluminum. Gallium nitrate semiconductors do things that silicon conductors and silicon wafers can't do. They can take 10 times the voltage. They can operate in frequencies where silicon fails, and they can tolerate temperatures that destroy silicon chips. You got to have gallium if you're going to do certain and produce certain items. Silicon carbonate might be a substitute, but China controls that too. So that's just one of 24. There are 20 other elements that China has said you're going to have to get permission to be able to import. So, what would it take to overcome this ban just on gallium? We have to recognize we no longer educate our children to be productive in manufacturing. We just don't. Our educational system for most kids is abject failure. It's a disgrace. The capital is misallocated in the United States. That's why we have all these hedge funds and these private equity companies. They're all running around stealing from everybody in the United States, but they don't really produce anything. And we no longer emphasize vocational education. Meanwhile, China has 11,000 vocational education centers. And what people need to realize is it takes 8 to 10 years to train a competent vocational worker. So if the United States needs 100 tons of gallium, what will it take to produce it? China makes 600 tons of gallium. In 2020, one company in China produced 18 tons of aluminum, and that ratio to produce gallium from production of aluminum is 50,000 to 120,000 to 1. So in order for the United States to produce even 100 tons of gallium, we would have to build more smelters and more manufacturing facilities. That right there, just to do that would involve at least $140 billion just to do that one item. And it would require us educating 35,000 100,000 specialized workers. Uh, and not only that, uh, it's not only the workers, it's the electricity. It would take another 51 uh, billion kilowatt hours of electricity to power these facilities. Um, and Then we'd have the problem of what do you do with the additional aluminum that you produce? You would have to sell it to somebody. So, and that's just, as I said, one of 20 items, and it doesn't even touch the battery technology that China has restricted or the high precision cutting tools and technology that they've restricted, or any of the other items that they've restricted that the United States decided because of neoliberalism and because of the need to impoverish the American population so that we can create all these billionaires that we decided we didn't need.
Well, you mentioned everybody's freaking out over this. Sylvia, you freaked me out. I had no
Not a
idea.
freak out.
I had no idea about gallium, never heard of it. Didn't realize how important it was. Did not realize that China was, I guess you said, the number one manufacturer of aluminum, which is unbelievable. That's needed everywhere. And I didn't realize that it was something that Silicon Valley depended on for everything they're doing. So this is this is like a nuclear bomb, really ready to explode in the United States and across Europe. And I wonder if Trump is even aware of what he's sitting on top of.
Well,
You know,
I mean, I don't know what they were thinking. Uh, you know, if you just, for example, China understood that we were coming at them, right? These militarists said, we're going to go get China. We're going to weaken China. We're going to weaken Russia. We're going to split Russia up in all these places. We're going to go out there. We're going to steal everything they've got. Well, China said, oh, okay, we better take a look at this. So they did. They were competent enough to do a complete analysis of the situation and see where the vulnerabilities were and to eliminate the vulnerabilities. Well, apparently we waltzed in and said, oh, we can just tariff the world. And then everybody, according to Trump, will have to come kiss his ass. Well, I'm sorry. It's not going to work that way. The rest of the world has agency. The rest of the world has power. The rest of the world aren't a bunch of idiots sitting around waiting to be told what to do by the people in the United States who think they are entitled to run the world. And so China decided they were going to do something about it. And yes, it not only impacts our ability to make weapons, but it impacts the entire digital economy. China can shut down AI tomorrow if they want to. China can shut down weapons manufacturing tomorrow if they want to. Now, there's a downside to that, and I think we need to discuss it because remember the story that Putin told as a child about the fact that there were rats in his building, and one day he cornered a rat. And what happened when the rat was cornered was the rat decided to fight back with everything that it had. And this rat, the West and militarism has a very important item to fight back with, and that's nuclear weapons, and in particular, these nuclear submarines. And I think before we close this conversation, people should be aware of the power that these nuclear submarines have and why it is that people like Putin and Xi are being so careful in terms of dealing with the United States and the Western powers to hopefully have them either come to their senses or to lose the capacity to fight wars before it comes to that point, because we are at the point now where we have two really, really crazy countries, one in particular in the Middle East, and that's called Israel. Israel has nuclear weapons. Germany sold it nuclear submarines. I read a blurb the other day that Israel was loading nuclear weapons onto these subs. The United States has at least 8 to 10 Ohio-class submarines at sea at all times loaded with nuclear weapons. These are serious issues, Regis.
Uh, I agree with you. And, I in uh, 2016 made my documentary 30 Seconds to Midnight. It's why I came to Russia. I was terrified at the time that we were so close to nuclear war between our two countries that I had to make that film. And the result of me coming to Russia ended up me coming back two more times and staying here. Now, you mentioned a couple of things. Russia and China, they weren't stupid. They understood what the United States, the UK, and their vassals in Europe were trying to do. We're trying to control, trying to take over, trying to get them to bow down and become subservient. But Russia, you mentioned how China advanced. Russia has also advanced in
No
the
question.
areas of high technology, in the areas of sophisticated weaponry, which the United States doesn't have and probably won't get for another 10 or 15 years,
If that,
namely, if ever, hypersonic missiles, radar that can scan over the horizon. Russia is far advanced in terms of space technology than the United States. The United States can't even get people to the International Space Station without
oh,
Russia.
Elon Musk has taken care of that. Elon Musk, yeah, we were dependent on Russia uh, for these launches, but now Elon Musk is taking care of that. But there's no question about it, Regis. The Russian education system is far superior to the education system in the United States. And Russia actually cares about its citizens to where they want every citizen to achieve their full potential. Apparently, in the United States, that's just not very important anymore. What's more important is to create more billionaires. And apparently, we've now created 1,000 billionaires. And if current trends continue, on line to create another 1,000 so that we have 2,000 by 2028. Well, by that time, God only knows what the rest of the country is going to look like. China's the same thing. China values education. China understands that every individual is important to the health of the nation and tries to educate its citizenry as well as possible. But also, neither one of these countries have a history of aggression outside their borders. Yeah, Russia's fought some wars here and there, but mostly to try to deal with the fact that for some reason, Europe has always wanted to break up Russia and always felt threatened by Russia. But China has never ever been aggressive. You know, back even before the age of discovery, China was sending ships to Africa, etc. And then the emperor decided that no, we didn't want to do that anymore, and so they ordered all those ships to be destroyed. China has never been aggressive in that sense. China wants to make things and sell them to you. And they apparently can do it better than most other countries. And so, if we're going to compete with China, we need to do it on the basis of education and excellence and quality. And the same thing is true with Russia. Now, China, in its statement, when it issued uh, this export ban, they mentioned the fact that they understood that these things were being used in weapons. And in fact, I have their statement here. Um, they said that they have been taking indiscriminate actions against China, and that the United States has been overreaching, and that they understood that these semiconductors were being used in these weapons. And so I think whatever happened in terms of our lack of complete surveillance of the situation and understanding of the situation, hopefully that is being corrected and that there will be perhaps better sense coming out of Washington, but that's the upside. The problem is, in order to become competitive again, it's going to take decades and trillions of dollars. And that may not be an option. And so this is the problem that is being faced, and this is the concern. And this is why I think that it's important to understand that there are some aspects of militarism that neither China nor Russia can fully and completely overcome. And you've got these submarines running around the ocean, and every one of them can fire at least 20 of these missiles, and every one of these missiles have four separately targeted devices, so that at any given time, 8 to 10 submarines can fire anywhere from 170 to 200 individually targeted nuclear weapons, all of which are more powerful than the nukes that exploded in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that will destroy the world. And so you don't want to push the United States or Israel to the point where they have to do that. So there has to be some way to make sense of how to climb down from this very serious situation that we find ourselves in. But to tell you the truth, just given the tenor and the intelligence and the ideology of the people that are in control, especially in Israel, and those people are very powerful here in the United States as well, and they're crazy. I just don't know. I don't know how the climb down is going to take place, but it needs to happen.
Yeah, I've always hoped that the United States would recognize that, and this is the UK as well, those 500 years of colonialism have come to an end, and that I've always hoped that they would both recognize that they can join the rest of the world community, not as the dominator, not as the controller, but as one among equals. And that is what I think too many people that are powerful just cannot accept. In terms of the threat of nuclear war, Russia has, I don't know how many, but several nuclear armed submarines that are off both coasts of the United States. Who knows where else? Uh, but Russia has, these hypersonic missiles, and the United States has no defense against that. I'm just wondering if President Putin, when he's having these discussions with Donald Trump, and lengthy discussions, if he also is not pointing that out. Because as you mentioned, Russia and China know exactly what's going on. And I think they recognize that the only power that the United States and Israel have coming to the table are nuclear weapons. It's a terrifying thought. Sylvia, any final thoughts? This has been very sobering, as usual, conversation, and everything you mentioned about China's superiority, not only in educating highly skilled technicians in all areas of technology. I just read where the one university in China is now the number one leading technological university in the world, surpassing MIT and whatever else is out
There's
there.
no question about it. I mean, um, it is a sobering situation. And what's particularly sobering is the fact that we are so far behind and what it will take for us to be able to catch up. As I said, I think the United States has a better chance than Europe to do that, but still it's going to be a major haul. And the thing that no president wants to do is to be the one to have to accept the fact that there's going to be a reduction in the standard of living in the United States, and that this is going to happen in order for us to rectify the horrible misallocation of everything that's taken place over the last 50 to 60 years as a result of this turn to neoliberalism. It has been, I told you that I've kind of been going through a funk trying to figure out, because the whole purpose of me doing the Substack was to try to figure out a way to create, to overcome some of these issues and to figure out a way to reform the system in order to have a fair economic system in this country. And then to come to the realization that any serious effort of reform could very well precipitate a crisis, because the crisis is being held at bay by all sorts of incredible um, uh, activities on the part of the government and the Federal Reserve. And that's just the reality of the situation. And I don't think very many people in the United States recognize that. But that is, unfortunately, the reality that we will have to face. And we will have to face that in the entire Western world at some point in the next 5 to 10 years.